They say that in the high desert, sound travels farther than sight. An echo can reach you 50 heartbeats before the rider himself crests the rise. But nothing travels faster than a promise a dying man has not yet given voice to. I learned that truth on the afternoon the wind came crawling out of the canyons like a wounded animal, carrying the smell of burnt juniper and something older than fear. If you're the kind of soul who still believes that land remembers, that oaths matter more than signatures, then stay with me. And if you stand for the right of a man to defend what the world means to him more than what it is worth, go on and like and subscribe, because this is the kind of story you don't just read, you stand witness to. The first time I saw old Elijah Coulter bleed into his own dust, I was close enough to count the grit stuck to his teeth, and I would swear before any court of man or spirit that the valley itself held its breath to listen. The sun was lowering behind the bluffs, stretching the Coulter ranch house into long black ribs of shadow, and the cicadas had gone quiet the way small animals go quiet before lightning hits the tallest tree. Elijah had been mending the east corral, sleeves rolled, hat low, his gray hair lifting slightly in the breeze like he was just another weather-worn piece of the land itself, when the riders came slipping down the slope like dark water. 5 of them, not in a hurry, armed like men who already think they own whatever they are looking at. His boy, Caleb, had been dragging a sack of feed toward the troughs, thin shoulders straining, maybe 14 at most, still boy shoulders, not yet the kind that know what weight a man has to carry in this world. I saw his face when he recognized them. Not fear yet, just a child's instinctive tightening, the sense that something had arrived without asking permission. The lead rider wore a duster the color of storm mud, handsome in the way a snake is handsome before it strikes, with a voice so smooth you could almost miss how cold it was when he said Elijah would sign the paper today, or feed the desert his bones. The old man didn't answer, not with words, anyway, just spat in the dirt, and turned back to hammering fence board like a man adjusting a single broken tooth on a wolf's jaw. And there's a moment, always, where a future forks in front of you, and you can feel one road scald the other. I knew we had stepped into that moment when the snake man dismounted without being asked, and his men spread into a slow crescent, like the kind of men who prefer testimony that can't talk back later. Caleb froze, his hands still wrapped around that sack of feed, because boys always freeze the first time someone threatens the gravity they believed held the world still. What followed was not a fight. A fight has 2 sides. This was a beating, hard, methodical, designed to correct reality itself. A rifle stock collided with old ribs, a boot followed, a fist after that. Elijah did not cry out, not when his hands split open on rock, not when his hat rolled away like a torn blessing, not when the duster man stooped to whisper some poison into his ear that made the boy choke on his own breath. They dragged him by the collar, made the boy watch, made the old man kneel, and taste his own blood until the dirt turned the color of rusted iron. I remember the boy's fingers shaking, not from fear, but from realization. That rumor people tell young sons, the one that claims justice wakes when courage does, was a lie. The men left Elijah broken, terms delivered, threat made tangible, and rode off under a rising copper sky without glancing back, because men like that don't fear consequence unless it wears a badge. Caleb staggered to his father, and I could see, almost like smoke rising from him, that something had unlatched behind his eyes. He didn't scream, didn't rage. He just gathered the old man onto his small frame, as though grief itself had fused to his bones, and began to walk toward the only border left in, the high country, the place where treaties weren't written on paper but in blood memory. As dusk finished swallowing the yard, the boy glanced backward, not at the house, not at the ruined fence, but at the land itself, like he was making a vow the sky might have to witness later. And I swear on every ghost out here, the wind shifted. The hush in the valley was no longer silence. It was listening. Because when the world takes your father from his knees, something in you either withers or sharpens. And that boy's heart did not break. Something far older woke inside it. Caleb did not return to the house for supplies that night. He didn't roll bandages or gather bedding or think through anything that could be called planning. He simply hitched the mule and laid his broken father across the wagon boards like a man carrying not flesh, but history wounded in its prime, and set his course toward the high passages, Those old canyons stitched into legend long before iron rails or survey stakes claimed to define the world. I followed at a distance, unseen, because some stories do not permit witnesses to stand too near until the moment they must swear to them. And the journey up the slope was a silent prayer of hoofbeat and grit as Elijah drifted in and out of pain delirium, whispering fragments of words so old they were half ritual and half remembrance. Not English, not fully Apache either, something older than both, carved out of gratitude from another lifetime when two nations had once saved each other from the same wintering death. By midnight, the cliffs had swallowed all horizon, walls rising like cathedral pillars of red stone, and still the boy did not falter. He moved like a child half led by a hand he could not see. In those canyons the air changes, thinner, older, heavy with memory, and the wind drags scents that belong to no present. Sage smoke, horse sweat, pine tar, embers of long-dead campfires that still cling like ghosts to the cool stone. Elijah stirred when they reached the old riverbed, turned dry in summer, but still recognizable by bone-white cottonwoods leaning overhead like watchmen. The same corridor where decades earlier he had once traded cloth and horses and seed with people other settlers called enemies, but whom he had called neighbors. Caleb knelt and pressed his palm into the dust there, not in prayer, but in appeal, like a boy signaling a door he did not know how to knock upon. And the stillness that answered was not indifference but assessment. I have seen war chiefs greet potential allies with less scrutiny than the silence that canyon gave them. When dawn unstitched the night, it came slowly, filtered through rock like first light into a temple, and with it came movement, soft, careful, like a deer testing the scent of iron. Shadows that were not shadows, a figure on the rim. Then two more near the bend where the cottonwoods bent deepest, until the boy and his father were no longer alone, but observed under a law far older than territorial courts. The one who approached first was broad-shouldered and still as basalt, hair in two thick braids, face marked not in war paint, but elder-rank duty. His name carried through rumor like a half-remembered warning. Estada, once called Haku Does Not Fall, a strategist from the old resistance years who had led men into battles where no maps existed and returned with more stories than scars. If he had chosen silence after the wars, it was not defeat but decision. He halted a few paces from Caleb and looked not at the boy but at Elijah, at the blood caked along his jaw, the broken ribs telegraphed beneath the torn shirt, and something passed through his eyes so brief and flaring it could have been mercy or fury or kinship resurrected. When he finally spoke, it was not questioning but remembering. The land still owes this man breath. Caleb's voice cracked when he tried to explain, but Estada raised a hand, not to silence, but to steady, and gave a small signal over his shoulder. From the cliffs emerged women with packs of herbs and cloth, not hurried, but with solemn urgency born of obligation long unmet. They lifted Elijah with the care one affords weapons of ancestral worth. No pity, no weakness, only the reverence given to old warriors who have earned pain honestly. Caleb watched, trembling, not with fear now, but recognition, that someone had heard him, though he had not spoken a full word the night long. When Estada turned back to him, the canyon quieted again, as if even the stone leaned closer. What has been taken must be answered, he said, voice low as thunder behind. Mountains. And if a son has come bearing witness, then the land will rise with him. And there it was, the first turning, subtle, monumental, the boy not merely rescued but claimed, his grief recognized not as weakness but summons. They brought Elijah deeper into the canyon to a place veiled by cedar thickets and rock shelves where healing belonged to those who still remembered how to barter with suffering. Caleb walked behind them, shoulders square now, not out of defiance but appointment, as though a door had opened behind his ribs and history itself had stepped through. For 3 days and nights the canyon held them in its bonework silence while Elijah hovered between breath and burial, and each hour the watchers multiplied, riders gathering on the ridges, quiet as stone, their presence not summoned by trumpet or alarm, but by the old law. When an honored man is struck for his land, the land calls its defenders from every distance. On the morning of the 4th day, when birdsong returned to the cottonwoods like approval, Caleb woke to find not 5 riders nor 20, but scores, Lines upon lines of horsemen perched across the canyon walls like a living storm battering the horizon from the inside out, watching the boy whose plea had now become their cause. He had come seeking shelter, but what he had found was reckoning gathering muscle and direction. And still, he had not yet spoken the single word they were all waiting to hear. They say a boy becomes a man not when he learns to fight, but when he learns what must be answered. And on the fifth dawn, beneath a sky burning copper at the edges, Caleb stood before the assembled riders. Rows upon rows layered into the canyon walls until it seemed the stone itself had grown muscle and intention. Estada set a hand upon the boy's shoulder, not guiding, not comforting, affirming. He did not ask, "What happened to you?" He asked, "What do you carry forward?" Caleb's voice, silent for days, rose steady and spare. They broke what they thought had no defenders. "I will show them it does." That was enough. Warriors shifted as one, not with cheering but with the rustle of inevitability. Justice was already moving. By sundown the warband rode, 400 strong across the upper ridge like a living storm, silent save for the thunder of hooves folding distance into consequence. Below them, the syndicate men had returned, staking rails along the Coulter waterline with the smug pace of men who believe a threat is a deed already done, until they looked up and saw history lined against the skyline. No warning shots, no speeches, just recognition, cold and final. The hired gunmen who had swaggered beneath a roof of borrowed fear collapsed the moment they realized there was no refuge in their employer's coin. A wall of riders closed around them the way a canyon closes on sound, complete, inescapable. Men who had treated violence as a language learned suddenly discovered they had never been fluent at all. The duster-clad ringleader tried to raise his rifle, not bravely, only reflexively, but Estada's stare froze him like an animal held at the edge of its own grave. The weapon sagged, his power with it. Those who laid down arms were stripped of their gun belts and horses and forced to walk eastward, exiled by the older law, the one that remembers. The ringleader tore up his own claim with shaking hands while Caleb watched without triumph, only finality. No jury could have delivered a cleaner verdict than that horizon of eyes. When the valley was quiet again, Elijah, mended but not yet strong, was carried home, and Caleb rode beside him not as the child who had watched helplessly, but as the hinge through which the land itself had turned. Word traveled outward like summer thunder. 400 Apache warriors riding not for conquest, but to defend the wounded keeper of a valley that still held its memory close. Some people called it legend. Others called it a warning. But those who lived close to the land said only this: justice came home on horseback. Years later, travelers passing through Coulter country swore they sometimes felt eyes in the ridges. Not hostile, not haunting, just watchful in that way protection is watchful. Elijah would rock slow in the shade of his porch and say the land never forgot who stood for it. And Caleb, no longer boy, not quite myth, became the man other sons pointed to when they spoke of what a promise becomes when it hardens into truth. Somewhere, at dusk, if the wind is right, you can still hear it. 400 hooves in the far distance, like a vow that never finished riding.